300 years ago, there was a tragic love triangle that happened here at Rochester Castle. This is a sad and tragic story of the White Lady. Kent has a dark history of fabled ghosts and spirits, but there is one entity in particular that is perhaps the most unsettling.
Today I want to tell you the story that's behind the story of the White Lady, or the ghost of Rochester Castle. But before telling you that part of the story, let me tell you about the castle, because it has significance for why a battle took place here, which eventually involved the death of the White Lady. I need to take you back to 1215. King John, a very unpleasant king, was ripping money off of his barons like nobody's business, and also if he fancied your wife or girlfriend, he would take them. So in effect, he wasn't actually very popular amongst his barons. And in the end, they decided to call him to account, and that led him agreeing to the terms of the barons in what we know as the Magna Carta. That was in the June of 1215. A few weeks later, John managed to get the Pope to declare that the document was illegal. And with that, the barons knew that they were going to have trouble. So they come and took control of Rochester Castle. When defending this country, Rochester Castle was a prime asset because you had the bridge nearby and the castle enabled to control the bridge, and that also stopped reinforcements coming from France, because this area was actually under a lot of French influence at that time. What is important to remember is that the bridge that de Montfort come across was not the bridge that we see here today. Basically, the bridge that he did come across was probably located very close to the bridge that you can see behind me. There was a later stone bridge, often referred to as the medieval bridge, was about 100 metres closer this way. However, that wasn't built until 1390. So the chances are what de Montfort crossed was a fairly poorly maintained wooden bridge. So a lot of horses and carriages went across there as well. So timber bridge, not well maintained, overused, and it was basically ready to fall down, which it eventually did. But it was there sufficiently for Simon de Montfort to exercise his siege of the castle. So in October 1215, the barons took control of this castle and a siege was set up. So John actually won that battle, and in fact the castle then became the property of the king. He started to behave himself slightly because of the threat of the French coming, but eventually in October 1216 he died. And his son Henry III was going to come to the throne, but he was only 9 years old. Therefore there was a council that run the country, and that actually made the barons really very happy, because in effect they had influence over the monarch. Things worked very well for the barons and Henry as a young man, but when Henry became king, he actually was very collaborative to start with, and in fact he invested an awful lot of money in building this castle. Firstly, he had to do the repairs that his father had created on the other side of the castle. He also built himself a bit of a royal palace here. And if you look at the walls of the castle here, up the top there was Henry III's room, and you can see the joists across the top there. And if you come down slightly, we're actually standing in the cellars that were under Henry's rooms there. So we had a harmonious situation until about 1260, when Henry had found his confidence, found his feet, and he became a lot more autocratic. That caused the barons a lot of trouble again, and eventually they conducted a coup, and it was Simon de Montfort that conducted the coup. Not all the barons were actually getting behind Simon de Montfort because they thought he'd gone a bit too far, but effectively he took control of southern England. And he claimed he was doing it with the authority of Henry. Henry clearly wasn't happy about that, so he called upon the French, Louis IX, to send reinforcements. With that, the barons knew they had to take control of this castle. They had to take control of the castle to actually stop Henry bringing in reinforcements from the French. And that was the scene set for the battle that took place here in Easter of 1264. This leads us on to the story of the White Lady. This is a ghost story. It didn't actually appear anywhere until a guy called Edwin Harris wrote a novel based on the siege of Rochester Castle by Simon de Montfort. To add some interest, he added some love interest. I think what the Love Islanders would call a love triangle. In the story, John de Warenne had a daughter called Blanche, and she was actually betrothed to Ralph de Capo in the story. I'm not too sure there ever was a Ralph de Capo. However, she was also the love focus of Gilbert de Clare, who was one of Simon de Montfort's colleagues that was involved in the raid. So we've got this situation where Blanche was actually engaged to Ralph de Capo, much to the chagrin of Gilbert de Clare. As in the novel, Edwin Harris picks up on the point that Simon de Montfort's troops withdrew and the people defending his castle gave chase. While the chase was taking place, her spurned lover, if you like, Gilbert de Clare, saw his opportunity to break into the castle and to capture Blanche. Although Edwin Harris in his novel doesn't say the purpose of it, there was a possibility that bride napping was part of his plan there. Because if you could kidnap a woman at that time, and once you've consummated the relationship, they had to get married. Whether that was in the novelist's mind, I don't know. Anyway, Ralph de Capo noticed that Gilbert de Clare was actually attacking Blanche. De Capo took a bow and arrow from one of his soldiers and aimed to kill Gilbert de Clare. The arrow hit Gilbert de Clare but was deflected off of his armour and actually killed his fiancée Blanche. Ralph de Capo came into the castle, I stress this is in the novel, and there was a fight between him and Gilbert de Clare. Ralph got killed. The bodies of Blanche and their fiancé Ralph were put into a cellar room, presumably until funeral arrangements can be made. Later that night, people claimed to have seen a white lady walking along the ramparts where Blanche had stood to watch the battle and indeed where she was killed. When they went back to check that she was actually where they left her, both the bodies were there. And as far as the novel was concerned, that is the start of the story of the White Lady. There's some problems with the story, as you can imagine. I can't find any evidence that there was a Ralph de Capo. And certainly John de Warenne did have two daughters, but neither of them was called Blanche. And it is rather convenient that the White Lady is also called Blanche. So it's a great story, but we've got to remember that its origins is in a novel that was based on a historical event that was written several hundred years after the battle.
And when did this happen?
About 30 odd years ago.
Right. So Mike's got a story about the White Lady.
Yeah, what I was doing, I was walking down the Maidstone Road one night, I heard all this giggling and laughter coming from the vines. So I sort of bottled it and decided not to walk down the vines and walked into Rochester High Street. And in the Jolly Night car park, I was on the other side of the wall, and the other side of the car park I saw this lady with a white collar, and she was like incandescent. And what happened was that she was sort of not walking properly, it was sort of glide, which made me a bit nervous. And I was a young boy, and I decided like I didn't want to be there basically, and just walked away very rapidly, straight across the bridge. But there was a little wisp of, it was a still night, and there was a little wisp of air go round, and this rubbish picked up, and it was a bit frightening at the time. But that was my story.
If you've enjoyed these creepy stories, keep watching and we will see you next time.